Welcome back everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this series, called What If Goku Remembered the Saiyans? My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like and subscribe to the page. Also leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin. Vegeta stood alone in the wilderness, the barren landscape stretching endlessly under a crimson-tinged sky. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just the sky, vast and indifferent. The defeat at Zarbin's hands still stung, more than any physical wound ever could. This wasn't the first time he'd faced defeat, but something about this loss gnawed at him. He'd always believed that once he ascended beyond a Super Saiyan, he'd be untouchable, unbeatable. Yet here he was, licking his wounds like a common soldier. "Father," a voice called softly from behind him. Vegeta stiffened, but didn't turn. "What do you want?" he asked coldly, his voice as sharp as the wind. Celia, his daughter, stepped forward, her boots crunching against the gravel. Her eyes were filled with a determination that matched his own, though her tone carried a gentleness Vegeta lacked. "I want you to come back to the lookout and stay with us. I don't need you or anyone else. I can take care of myself," Vegeta replied curtly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Kakarot has a plan to beat the androids," Celia said, ignoring his stubbornness. She knew how her father worked. Pride was his armor, and piercing it required persistence. Vegeta let out a sharp laugh, the sound bitter and hollow. "Kakarot, a plan? Let me guess. It involves collapsing in the middle of the fight and letting someone else do the real work?" "No," Celia said firmly, clenching her fists. There were moments when her father's arrogance drove her up the wall, but she'd learned not to take it personally. "There's a place on the lookout where you can get a year of training in a single day. It's called the Room of Spirit and Time. We're using it to prepare for the androids." Vegeta finally turned to look at her, his brow furrowing. That caught his attention. A year's worth of training in a single day? He couldn't deny the allure of that. He'd barely managed to reach his current form before the androids had shown up. With a year of training, with a year of pushing past his limits, he could crush them. All of them. "Fine," he said after a moment, his voice low but resolute. "I'll come." At the lookout, Kakarot, still in his Super Saiyan form, opened his eyes, exhaling deeply. His meditation had been productive, but maintaining the transformation was still exhausting. Each session, though, pushed him closer to mastery. The strain on his body was easing, bit by bit. Soon, it wouldn't just be a form he could achieve, it would be his base. He stood and stretched before walking over to the edge of the lookout. Piccolo was there, standing motionless, his arms crossed as he stared down at the earth below. "Any change?" Kakarot asked as he approached. Piccolo's antennae twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, but his expression didn't waver. "More people are disappearing around West City," he said gravely. "I can't sense a power signature there, so it has to be one of the androids." Kakarot frowned, his brows knitting together. "And the other threat? The one Kami thought he sensed?" "I'm not so sure anymore," Piccolo admitted, his frustration evident. "It might just be 21. If it's something else, it's staying hidden." "How's he making people disappear like that?" Kakarot asked, leaning on the ledge. Piccolo shook his head. "I don't know, but we can't just sit here while it happens. We have to act." "I know," Kakarot said, his voice calm but firm. "But we have to wait until we're ready. If we rush into a fight now, we'll lose. And once we beat them, we can use the Dragon Balls to wish everyone back." A long silence followed. Finally, Piccolo spoke, his tone heavy. "The Dragon Balls are gone." Kakarot blinked, stunned. "What do you mean, gone?" "They disappeared when Kami and I fused," Piccolo explained. "Without him, there's no one to maintain them. They no longer exist." Kakarot hesitated, processing this revelation. "Can't you recreate them from a model or something? Didn't Kami do that before, when King Piccolo destroyed Shenron?" Piccolo's lips curled into a slight frown. "It's not that simple. I think there's still too much darkness in my heart. Even now." Kakarot tilted his head. "But Kami was able to make them even after everything he did. Years ago," Piccolo began, his voice lowering. "Before Kami and I split, we created a set of Dragon Balls. They were similar to the ones you know, but with one difference. They had a black star in the center." Kakarot's eyes widened slightly. "Black star? What happened to them?" Piccolo's expression darkened further. "They had a fatal flaw. Any wish made on them caused the Dragon Balls to scatter across the galaxy. Worse than that, the planet they were used on was destroyed within a year." Kakarot's mouth went dry. "Destroyed? And those Dragon Balls, they're gone now, right? Well, they were created on a different planet, Piccolo began, his voice tinged with reluctant recollection. Before Kami and I split, a wish was made on them. That planet exploded 1 year later. After that, I personally gathered them up and kept them with me so they couldn't be used again. Kakarot tilted his head. That's when you came to Earth, right? Piccolo nodded. Exactly. I became Earth's guardian after that. But when Kami and I separated, the Dragon Balls became inert. Without his essence, they couldn't function anymore. Kakarot's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed the information. So, now that you've fused back together to face this threat, they're active again? Yes, Piccolo admitted grimly, his gaze sharp and serious. But we must not use them, under no circumstances. Kakarot held up his hands, a reassuring smile crossing his face. I get it, Piccolo. Trust me, I'm not planning on using them. But I might have another idea to bring the Dragon Balls back. Piccolo raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. And what is that? Well, Kakarot said, rubbing the back of his head, we just need a new Namekian guardian. I can head to Namek and see if anyone's willing to take the job. Piccolo considered the plan, stroking his chin. That could work. If you can convince someone, we could have a functioning set of Dragon Balls again. Exactly, Kakarot said with a grin. But before that, let's check on Raditz and Trunks. They should be just about done in the Room of Spirit and Time. The two warriors turned and walked to the entrance of the chamber. Outside, the rest of the Z fighters were gathered, waiting for the next pair to train. So, Krillin said, arms crossed as he looked around. Who's going in next? I am, Piccolo and Vegeta declared simultaneously. The two turned to glare at each other, and the tension in the air grew thick. Vegeta's piercing gaze locked onto the Namekian. I'm going in first, he stated firmly, his voice low and dangerous. Piccolo refused to be intimidated. I have a duty to protect Earth and its people. I'll train to ensure this threat is eliminated. All right, Kakarot said quickly, stepping between them before the argument could escalate. Two people can go in at once. Why don't you both go in together? I train alone, Vegeta growled. I don't need anyone slowing me down, Piccolo shot back. Kakarot held up his hands in exasperation. You don't have to train together. The chamber is huge. There's more than enough room for both of you to do your own thing. Vegeta's glare didn't waver, but after a moment, he muttered, Fine, Piccolo echoed, his tone equally curt. The tension was broken by a new voice echoing from the hallway. What's with all the yelling? Raditz stepped out, his long mane of hair swaying slightly with his movements. While his appearance hadn't changed much, anyone with a keen sense of power could tell he had grown significantly stronger. Kakarot smirked. Just Vegeta being Vegeta. How was your training? It went well, Trunks replied, stepping forward alongside his uncle. The young Saiyan had undergone a striking transformation. He'd grown taller, his violet hair longer and wilder, and his muscles far more defined. His aura radiated confidence. We're a lot stronger now, Trunks said, glancing briefly at Vegeta, who met his gaze with a proud, almost imperceptible smirk. Do we know where the androids are? Raditz asked, cutting through the brief moment of father-son connection. There was a disturbance in West City earlier, Piccolo said, but it's been quiet for now. We're still unsure. I've got a lead, Bulma chimed in, stepping forward with her ever-present tablet in hand. A farmer near Gingertown contacted Capsule Corp. Apparently, he found what he described as a time machine. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The group fell silent, eyes widening. A time machine? Trunks repeated, his voice sharp. Are you sure? Bulma nodded. It matches the description of your machine, Trunks, but we'll need to see it for ourselves. Let's go check it out, Trunks said, his voice resolute. I'll go with you, Bardock said, stepping forward with a confident grin. Trunks hesitated, looking at his younger, but still intimidating, older brother. You sure you're up for it? Bardock's grin widened. I may not be as strong as you are now, but I'm no weakling. I'll stay here, Raditz said. If the androids attack somewhere else, I can use instant transmission to get there in time. Good plan, Kakarot said, his smile fading as he turned toward Bardock. But I'm not coming with you. Why not? Bardock asked. I've got another mission, Kakarot explained. I'm heading to Namek to find us a new guardian. Before anyone could respond, Kakarot raised 2 fingers to his forehead, closing his eyes in concentration. His body shimmered for a brief moment before disappearing entirely. Kakarot reappeared on Namek in a brilliant flash of light, landing in the center of a peaceful Namekian village. The emerald grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the twin suns bathed the landscape in a warm glow. A few Namekian children playing nearby stopped to stare, their wide eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and awe. "Who goes there?" A deep, authoritative voice called out. Elder Mori stepped forward, his robes flowing behind him, his tall figure radiating wisdom and calm. "It's me," Kakarot said, with his usual easygoing smile, raising a hand in greeting. Recognition dawned on the elder's face. "Ah, Kakarot, the warrior who saved our planet from Frieza. It is good to see you again. What brings you back to Namek?" Kakarot's expression turned serious, though his tone remained polite. "Our planet's in danger. Some powerful androids have shown up, and our guardian, Kami, fused with Piccolo so they'd be strong enough to fight them." Elder Mori folded his arms, his face thoughtful. "You have helped us greatly in the past. If Earth is in peril, then we will do whatever we can to assist. I can send some of our strongest warriors to aid you." Kakarot shook his head quickly. "Thanks, but we've got plenty of fighters on Earth. What we really need is a new guardian. Without one, the Dragon Balls can't work anymore." "I see," Mori said, nodding slowly. "I understand now. You're seeking a new guardian for your world. That is no small request." He paused, then smiled faintly. "But I believe I know someone perfect for the role. Dende." Kakarot tilted his head. "Dende? Really?" "Yes," Mori replied. "Dende has always admired you and your son. He's spoken often of wanting to visit Earth since the last time you were here. Though young, he possesses wisdom and kindness beyond his years. He will make a fine guardian for your world. The only condition is that you promise he can return to visit us from time to time." Kakarot grinned, scratching the back of his head. "That won't be a problem. I'll take good care of him, I promise." Meanwhile, on Earth, Trunks, Bardock, and Bulma scoured the open fields outside Gingertown. The area was eerily quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. The trio moved carefully, their eyes scanning every inch of the overgrown landscape. "Hey, I found something!" Bardock's voice rang out across the field. Trunks and Bulma rushed over to join him, stopping short when they saw what had caught his attention. Before them stood a time machine, almost identical to the one Trunks and Celia had arrived in, except for one glaring difference. A massive hole gaped in the canopy, the edges jagged and burnt. "It's my time machine," Trunks said slowly, his voice laced with confusion. "But that's impossible!" Bulma exclaimed, her brows furrowing. "I saw you put it back in your capsule when you got here. This has to be from another timeline." "Another timeline?" Bardock asked, frowning. "Then who or what came out of it?" Trunks crouched closer to inspect the machine, his hand brushing over the damaged edges of the canopy. "Whatever it was strong enough to punch its way out from the inside." "Strong enough to break out of this?" Bardock murmured, his voice heavy with concern. "What could do that?" Bulma shook her head, her analytical mind already racing. "I don't know, but let's keep looking. We might find more clues nearby." They spread out, carefully combing the area. Minutes later, Bardock called out again. "I found something!" Trunks and Bulma hurried over to where Bardock stood, a short distance from the time machine. On the ground lay a large, cracked object, its surface rough and organic looking. "What is that?" Bulma asked, leaning in for a closer look. "It seems to be some kind of egg," Trunks replied, kneeling beside it. The center of the egg had a dried, slimy residue, suggesting it had hatched recently. "From the looks of it," Bardock said, glancing back at the overgrown time machine, "that thing has been here for at least 3 or 4 years." Bulma knelt beside the egg, pulling out a small sample jar. "There's significant overgrowth on the machine," she noted. "I'm going to take a sample of this egg. Maybe we can analyze it back at Capsule Corp and figure out where it came from and what might have hatched from it." Far away, on a sandy beach, the androids stepped off a boat, their boots sinking slightly into the warm sand. Before them stood a small pink house with a red roof, looking serene and untouched by the chaos they'd brought elsewhere. "So this is Master Roshi's house," 17 said, his voice cool and curious. 18 smirked slightly. "Doesn't look like much. Are you sure this is the place? I wonder if anyone's home," 17 mused. As if in answer, the door creaked open, and an old man with a long white beard stepped out, his sunglasses glinting in the sunlight. Master Roshi's expression turned wary as he took in the strangers on his beach. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice steady but cautious. "It's the big bad androids," 18 said with a sly laugh, her voice carrying a teasing edge. Master Roshi stood frozen, his face unreadable, until a comical fountain of blood shot from his nose as his eyes locked on 18. She arched an eyebrow, crossing her arms, and tilted her head in disbelief. "What's wrong with him?" 17 muttered, giving Roshi a side glance. 18 sighed, noticing the old man's shameless ogling. "You're pathetic," she said flatly, but her tone carried more amusement than malice. Roshi snapped out of his daze, quickly wiping his nose and adjusting his sunglasses. "Where's Kakarot?" 17 asked, stepping forward, his voice calm but commanding. The old man straightened, trying to compose himself. "He's training to beat you," Roshi replied, his tone steady despite the tension hanging in the air. 18 smirked. "Well, we'd really like to meet him," she said. Roshi opened his mouth, about to utter something no doubt inappropriate, but quickly thought better of it. As much as his impulses threatened to take over, he wasn't suicidal, not with killer androids standing on his beach. "Don't worry about finding Kakarot," a chilling voice said from the shadows. Roshi spun around, startled. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. The figure stepped into the light, revealing its grotesque form. The creature was a towering 7 feet tall, its green, spotted skin glistening under the sun. Insect-like wings extended from its back, fluttering slightly, while a long, segmented tail with a stinger-like end swayed ominously behind it. "I'm the answer to Jiro's ultimate problem," the creature said, its voice both smooth and menacing. "Cell!" Roshi whispered, his blood running cold. "And how are you the answer?" 17 asked, his voice steady, but his stance shifting subtly into a defensive posture. Cell chuckled, his lips curling into a sinister grin. "I am Jiro's ultimate creation, but I'm not yet complete. To reach my final form, I must absorb the power cores of 17, 18, and 21. "Well, I don't want to be absorbed," 17 shot back, his voice tinged with defiance. "So why don't you buzz off?" Without warning, 17 launched himself at Cell, his fist hurtling toward the bio-android's face. Cell didn't flinch. His hand shot up, catching 17's wrist effortlessly. "Bold of you to volunteer to be first," Cell said, his voice brimming with dark amusement. Cell's tail whipped around, its tip splitting open like a grotesque flower. The appendage darted toward 17. "Run!" 16's booming voice broke through the chaos. "I'll hold him off!" 18 hesitated only for a moment before taking off into the sky, her form a blur as she fled. Behind her, the ground shook violently, and she could feel Cell's energy spiking. The bio-android's muscles bulged grotesquely as he absorbed 17, his form shifting. His face became more human-like, his feet changing from their insect-like shape to something resembling shoes. He flexed his fingers, testing his new strength. Cell turned his gaze skyward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "You won't get far," he muttered, preparing to pursue 18. "Stop!" 16 said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but his movements were deliberate as he positioned himself between Cell and 18's path of escape. Cell turned, his amusement evident. "And who's going to stop me? You?" "I will," 16 said simply, his gaze unyielding. Cell laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed across the beach. Brave words from a machine. 16 didn't respond. He merely advanced, his mechanical body emitting a faint hum of energy. The two met halfway, and Cell struck first, backhanding the larger android with terrifying force. 16 staggered back, the impact splitting his metal plating and exposing wires in his head. He fell to the ground, motionless. "Well, that was disappointing," Cell said with a smirk, turning back toward 18's retreating energy signature. "Leaving so soon?" a voice called from behind him. Cell stopped, his wings twitching slightly. He turned to see Raditz standing there, his arms crossed and a confident smirk on his face. "I figured you'd at least want to try out that new body against a worthy warrior," Raditz said, his tone dripping with challenge. "And you're worthy?" Cell asked, tilting his head. Raditz's smirk widened. "I've been doing some training. I figured you might want a real challenge." Cell grinned, his predatory gaze locking onto Raditz. "Let's see what you've got. After all, I could use a warm-up before achieving perfection." Raditz clenched his fists at his sides, his aura flaring to life. In an instant, his dark hair flashed golden, his eyes shifting to a piercing turquoise. His power surged, causing the ground beneath him to crack. But he didn't stop there. Raditz pushed further, his muscles bulking up as his energy continued to rise. The wind whipped around him violently, carrying his immense power through the air. Cell's grin grew wider, his voice low and eager. "I see this will be a good fight indeed." Cell made the first move, charging at Raditz with a powerful right cross. The air cracked from the force of his punch. Raditz, now an ascended Super Saiyan, raised his forearm with practiced ease and blocked the blow. His expression remained calm, betraying no effort. Undeterred, Cell pressed the attack, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks, each aimed at exploiting any perceived weakness in Raditz's defenses. Yet, time and again, Raditz effortlessly parried, dodged, or deflected the strikes. The sharp sound of their clashing blows reverberated through the air like a symphony of destruction. Cell's mind raced as he fought. How could this be? A mere Saiyan standing up to my perfect form? Impossible. His frustration grew with each failed attempt to land a meaningful strike. "Is this all you've got?" Raditz taunted, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I expected more from someone claiming to be perfect." Growling, Cell lunged forward again, but his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crushing punch to his face. The impact sent his head snapping back, and for a brief moment he saw stars. Before he could recover, Raditz vanished, his form flickering out of sight. "What?" Cell snarled, scanning his surroundings. In a blur, Raditz reappeared behind him. With both fists clenched together, he delivered a devastating double axe handle strike to the back of Cell's head. The bio-android was launched downward like a comet, crashing into the ocean below with a colossal splash. Waves erupted outward, swallowing the surrounding area in a turbulent fury. Raditz floated above the water, his eyes sharp and searching. He couldn't sense Cell's energy signature anymore, a skill the android had perfected to mask his presence. The calm surface of the ocean reflected the rising tension. Raditz's jaw tightened as he scanned the vast expanse below. "Where are you, you slimy freak?" he muttered, his tone laced with irritation. Far above Earth, at the lookout, Kakarot appeared in a flash of light, a young Namekian boy standing beside him. The air was serene, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding elsewhere. "You're back," Mr. Popo greeted warmly, stepping forward with his usual composed demeanor. "I take it everything went well?" Kakarot gave a quick nod and gestured to the boy beside him. "We have a new guardian. Everyone, meet Dende." From across the lookout, Bardock's eyes widened, and he hurried over with a wide grin. "Dende, it's been a while. Good to see you, kid." "It's good to see you too, Bardock," Dende replied, bowing respectfully. Despite his youth, his voice carried a certain wisdom, an echo of his responsibilities. Yamcha crossed his arms, eyeing the small Namekian skeptically. "Isn't he a little young for this? Are we sure he's up for the job?" Kakarot's expression didn't waver. "Elder Mori said Dende's extremely talented for his age. If he says Dende can do it, I believe him." Bardock, still beaming, chimed in. "Can you really make Dragon Balls?" Dende nodded confidently. "I should be able to create a new set within 100 days. Kakarot, ever direct, scratched the back of his head. "We were actually hoping they could be ready sooner." The young Namekian paused, considering the request. "If you have the old dragon model, I can reactivate them immediately." Bardock's eyes lit up. "Can you make them grant 3 wishes, like the ones on Namek?" Dende nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, but I'll make sure they can still revive multiple people with a single wish." "That's fantastic!" Mr. Popo exclaimed, a rare smile crossing his face. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the ocean suddenly erupted as Cell leapt from the water with feral intensity. His arms snaked around Raditz in an unrelenting body lock, crushing the Saiyan's torso with monstrous strength. "You're pathetic!" Cell hissed, venom dripping from his words. "Do you realize how easily I could absorb you? Your strength would add so little to my own. It's almost insulting." Raditz struggled against the crushing grip, the android's hold tighter than iron. Despite his discomfort, his defiant smirk never wavered. "What are you?" he spat. Cell's lips curled into a sinister smile. "I am Cell," he declared, his voice a mix of pride and malice. "The ultimate creation of Dr. Gero, designed to be the pinnacle of perfection." Raditz grunted, his muscles straining as he tested the bio-android's grip. "You call this perfection? I've met earthworms with better hugs." Cell's eye twitched at the insult, but before he could retort, Raditz roared, unleashing a sudden burst of energy. The force radiated outward in a powerful shockwave, slamming into Cell with the force of a typhoon and ripping him away from Raditz's body. The android was hurled backward, his feet skidding across the air as he fought to stabilize himself. Raditz seized the moment, raising his hands as a fiery aura surrounded them. Energy crackled and sparked around his fingers as he drew back, his voice booming across the battlefield. "Double Sunday!" he bellowed, releasing twin beams of brilliant energy straight toward Cell. The twin beams of Raditz's Double Sunday attack tore through the sky like lances of pure destruction, slamming into Cell with a deafening explosion. The impact sent the bio-android hurtling backward through the air, his body crashing into a nearby island with the force of a meteor. The collision shook the ground, leaving a massive crater in its wake. The surrounding terrain cracked and smoldering from the sheer energy of the blast. Raditz descended to the ground, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The power of this ascended Super Saiyan form was immense, but the toll it took on his body was equally severe. He clenched his fists, willing himself to remain steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. From the depths of the crater, a figure began to stir. Cell emerged, his form battered and mangled. The entire right side of his body was gone, reduced to nothing more than charred remnants. Despite his injuries, he carried himself with an unnerving calmness, his lips curling into a smirk. Raditz crossed his arms, his voice dripping with confidence. "I guess I was too much for you." Cell chuckled, a hollow and sinister sound. "You really think so, do you?" He closed his eyes and began to focus. In mere seconds, the parts of his body that had been obliterated started to regenerate, sinews and muscles weaving themselves back together with unnatural precision. Within moments, he stood whole again, as if Raditz's attack had never landed. "You still don't get it," Cell said, his voice tinged with mockery. "I am the pinnacle of perfection." Raditz narrowed his eyes, studying the android's movements carefully. "You're stalling," he said flatly. "That last attack took more out of you than you want to admit. Sure, you can regenerate, but I've seen that trick before. It's not limitless. It drains energy. Energy you'll eventually run out of. I just hope I don't run out first," Raditz thought grimly, keeping his expression steady. Cell tilted his head, his grin widening. "Clever deduction. You're right, of course. My energy isn't infinite, but even now, I see the truth. I'll need my perfect form to face you properly. Without it, you're proving to be a worthy challenge, Saiyan." "Not happening," Raditz shot back immediately, his voice sharp. "Maybe Vegeta would have let you play your little games, but I'm not falling for it. If you're looking for someone to humor you, you've come to the wrong Saiyan. I'm ending this now." Cell's confident facade faltered for a split second. His mind raced. Raditz wasn't like the others. There was no pride he could exploit, no ego he could manipulate. If he couldn't buy time through words, he'd have to rely on more devious tactics. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.